So we've seen works with a strong critical or satirical commentary on the uses of AI. We've seen a lot of projects doing multiple experimentations of using co-creative strategies with AI. And some of the stage of experimentation level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of projects which were interesting ideas, but were not fully fleshed out, partly because the tools are so new, so people are struggling to learn the tools, and they're not necessarily so critical of those tools. But I think another thing that we saw was that because the context of animation, the new on the title, new animation, people are eligible to submit from so many different kinds of practices. We got, not only screen-based work, we have installations, we had games, we had scientific visualizations, which we had very interesting discussions about.
Animated textures, animated embroidery.
Exactly, animated embroidery, dance projects, and then projects also that didn't really fit in any, they were called hybrid, I guess. So I think that was also interesting, is then not only to see the kind of themes, but to see how people try to address the form that they were working in, and how to position it, basically. So yeah, I think that was an interesting thing. That's what made the jurying challenging, because if it was just watching, 50 computer graphics CGI films, then you judge them based on, okay, it's a film, and is the story quality and how good is the execution? But we were faced with a much more difficult task.
The winning projects are using the mediums and using a certain type of concept, what is a little bit more, like, aesthetically speaking, technically speaking, giving us more emotional response. I think overall that was something what we took into consideration when selecting these works. Like, does the project leaves us with a strong feeling even after 2 days of looking through 99, how many works have we looked, like 99 projects. So that was something, that was one of the criteria, I think.
I think also those projects use new kinds of technologies, new kinds of image making that are enabled through new image making technologies, but they also somehow transcend the tools. So you don't think about, was that made with Unreal Engine? Was that made with generative AI? Was that made? That's, I think, also the success. All those projects we were talking about content, but of course we're aware that the content's enabled by the tool, so form and expression are linked. But I think that's what sets them apart. That they also have, they have all strong social, political,
social or environmental commentary.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
And that's what art should do. It should not necessarily try to solve problems. They either bring awareness or they put things in a different perspective for people. So.
And the good old question of how do we know that it's going to be understandable for other people watching it? So I think when we sit together and we go through projects together, all 5 members of the jury, I personally took an approach that I wanted to understand how do I feel without knowing who the artist is, where they're from, what the concept is, how do I feel, how does it make me feel? And then, interestingly, those projects, what we watched together and left us already without reading the concept with a strong emotional response, those kind of stayed around until the final rounds, and then obviously we read the concept, and if that was aligned, then that was a green light. That was ticking one really important box, I think, along our metrics, our selection of metrics.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because at least 2 of the winning projects, I recall the first time everyone saw them, pretty much it was unanimous. Like, we didn't talk about them that much, actually, at first. Whereas other ones, we were kind of, well, I don't know, And I think that also marks a good project, that you have this kind of immediate response. And then, of course, later you talk and you try to, and then you kind of say, well, was that immediate response right, or did I just kind of jump to conclusion? But I think, again, eventually, usually your gut instinct on the first time is right, but you have to go through a process to also challenge yourself and say, is that gut instinct really, am I just reacting on my gut instinct, or no, maybe something else is going on, or maybe I'm putting something into it. But I think in the end, we came back to our gut instinct on those projects. Yeah.
Definitely.
So the projects in our portfolio, I would say, were really diverse. Quite a range of projects, but maybe some overall trends or questions we saw reoccurring. I think there was a huge interest in neuroscience and in general how technology affects us cognitively. I think I also saw a lot of interspecies work, thinking about other forms of intelligence, natural intelligence. What else did you see?
I also saw a lot of textile work, craft also. So it's quite interesting to see what the interactive means today. So that was like the beyond the screen sort of the tendencies there too. And we saw also some like power and challenging against power work. So that was very encouraging to see that from the individual artist. And also the mixture of the collaborative artists with institution. So that was so difficult to, judge or to find the way to understand and the way to value the work and the project itself. It was a hard job.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there were a lot of individual artists, but then there were individual artists collaborating with studios. There were collectives. There were like institutionally backed projects. And, for us, we kept weighing, like, how do we judge projects that have various levels of resource support?
Yeah.
It was difficult.
Yeah. And also we had quite a, really huge diversity of the careers, ages, and, experiences, and also the backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, of course, gender. But, it's actually really more than I expected. Even from the pre-selection, and that was also made us more not difficult, a challenge actually.
I think there were actually a good amount of AI projects.
Yes, I think so. I mean, this was actually expecting somehow, because we are living in the very much time of we don't know how to understand artificial means. And also intelligence. So AI, what that means, or how we accept that in our everyday social context, or also academic context, etc. So that was actually quite overwhelming for me to understand what is AI after all.
Yeah, I mean, there were AI projects this year that I think were contending with how AI will impact our social relationships, how we will relate to the machines in our home. There were projects that were maybe a bit more optimistic and thinking about how AI can push certain aesthetics. And of course there were some that were a little bit doom and gloom, scary. What will be the future impacts of this system if it develops unchecked?
And also nice things was we saw a lot of sense of humors.
Yes.
Yeah, very creative sense of humors to discuss about this topic. It was inspiring.
I mean, I think we've seen an explosion of AI tools this past year, and so in the application pool, we saw many artists experimenting with those tools, and I think we're asking questions that were very specific to this moment we're in socially with AI. I think by the time of next jurying cycle, we'll get questions that are even more particular or nuanced, right? But I think we were receiving a lot of projects that were still at the phase of how will this impact us long term?
And also as for point of view as an art piece or experimental project or as a research project, the quality of the project is still, some of the work looked like more experimental and still demo phase rather than completed finished work, which it's still also very welcoming for us. It takes a lot of courage to apply in that state. But I'm I guess that the researcher, artists and scientists are in the point that we have to discuss this now rather than later. So that was the sense of emergency was there.
Also es war total spannend zu sehen, mit welcher Bandbreite an Thematiken sie die Jugendlichen befasst haben, auch dieses Jahr wieder. Also es ist wirklich alles dabei gewesen, von Digitalität bis hin zu schwereren Thematiken wie Krieg,
Umverteilung. Die Klimakrise spielt klar nach wie vor eine große Rolle in der Aufarbeitung. Aber was auch schön anzuschauen war, dass viele dieser Krisen oder Problematiken, die ja sehr politisch sind, doch auch im Privaten wiedergespiegelt werden, in sehr persönlichen Aufarbeitungen. Also das haben wir auch sicher beobachtet.
Besonders der persönliche Zugang war einfach schön anzusehen, weil es auf eine sehr niederschwellige Art und Weise passiert ist, also sehr zugänglich war. Und das hat uns besonders gefreut, auch bei den ganz Kleinen, die große gesellschaftliche Themen angesprochen haben.
Was man zu den, weil du gerade die ganz Kleinen oder die unter 10-Jährigen angesprochen hast, was sehr beeindruckend war, ist, dass sie sich mit Pflege und der Zukunft der Pflege auseinandergesetzt haben. Das war wirklich beeindruckend mit anzusehen. Also, dass sie wissen, dass sie da auch was verändern muss, um quasi unsere alternde Gesellschaft in die Zukunft zu bringen. Pflege bei den unter 10-Jährigen war ein großes Thema.
Auch Technik war natürlich wieder ganz vorne dabei, auch bei den Kleinen. Und es war nicht nur eine Bewunderung für die Technik da, sondern auch verschiedene Ängste, wie es weitergeht in dieser Hinsicht und wie die Jugend umgeht mit diesen digitalen Revolutionen, die jetzt irgendwie passieren, wie auch künstliche Intelligenz.
Ja, und weil du am Anfang so eine Bandbreite angesprochen hast, vielleicht, wenn wir es uns auch noch anschauen, wie es aufgearbeitet worden ist oder welche Medien verwendet worden sind. Wir haben irgendwie, und das finde ich auch total beeindruckend, so auch humoristische Beiträge, die sich satirisch zum Beispiel mit der Klimakrise auseinandersetzen, aber das total dann auf den Punkt gebracht haben. Und dann haben wir aber Personen, oder ich würde ja eben sagen KünstlerInnen, die schon so eine Exzellenz mitbringen in der Arbeit, die sie eingereicht haben. Also einfach, wo man merkt, das ist total deren Ding, das ist die Handschrift. Und dann über diese Handschrift das irgendwie so auf den Punkt bringen und irgendwie konkret übermitteln. Also das hat mich total fasziniert.
Also wirklich enorm beeindruckend, mit welcher Professionalität diese jungen Leute auch gearbeitet haben.
Total.
Auch in kollaborativen Projekten, die teilweise enorme Formen angenommen haben. Also wirklich extrem beeindruckend vom schieren Engagement dieser Jugendlichen.
Ja, weil es ja total schwierig ist, schon alleine ein Projekt auf die Beine zu stellen, aber irgendwie dann zu 10 oder noch mehr als 10 Leute, die sich zusammentun für zum Beispiel ein Konzert, irgendwie noch eine Botschaft dazu, also und multimedial das aufarbeiten. Ja.
Genauso beeindruckend waren auch Einzelpersonen, sich enormen Aufwand gemacht haben, zum Beispiel irgendwie fast 6.000 Fotografien gemacht haben, um einen Stop-Motion-Film zu verwirklichen. Das war einfach extrem beeindruckend für uns, das zu sehen.
Und ich finde schon eines, wenn nicht das dominierende Thema, was jetzt ich auch mitnehmen werde, ist sicher der Umgang mit Social Media und wie Social Media ihr Leben beeinflusst. Die Abhängigkeit von Social Media spielt eine ganz große Rolle und wie man auch irgendwie wieder ein bisschen zurück, ich sage jetzt mal, ins echte Leben finden kann. Das ist mir hängen geblieben.
Auch der Leistungsdruck, der vermittelt wird auf diese Plattformen.
Über die Plattformen, ja.
Eben auch nicht nur auf diese Plattformen, natürlich auch in Institutionen wie der Schule. Ich finde, das habe ich auch sehr stark gespürt, dass es eine große Überforderung gibt, auch bei den Jugendlichen.
Ja.
Und ganz interessante Ansätze, wie sie mit diesen Themen dann umgegangen sind.
Oder auch dem Leistungsdruck zu entkommen. Also das war auf jeden Fall so ein Ventil dafür, glaube ich, die Projekte, die sie eingereicht haben.